Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of our Career Insight series for the fall semester, Careers in Music and Audio. My name is Jihyun Ju. I'm an advisor and program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. We'll be hearing from 3 Barnard alums today. Thank you so much to our panelists for making the time to join us. The bios of our alums I'm going to drop in the chat in just a second. For students in the room, there will be an audience Q&A toward the end of the program. So for those who are interested in asking our panelists a question, feel free to unmute yourself when the time comes. If you're feeling shy today, you can also throw it into the chat and I'll read it out loud for you. Right. So we'll start off with introductions. So for our panelists, please introduce yourself. We'd love to hear about your current role, as well as what sparked your initial interest in the work that you're doing now. And the conversation is casual. You guys can jump in and get things started.
I'll go first, I guess. Hello. My name is Kira Rangsdorf. I'm class of 2007, and I am a music educator. I'm a choral conductor and vocalist. I live in the Seattle area. And my current role is I am a conductor teacher at Northwest Girl Choir, which is a private nonprofit choir in the Seattle area for treble voices. Even though it's called Northwest Girl Choir, it's a non-binary organization. And I conduct an ensemble that is 7th through 9th grade treble voices. I'm also a high school choir teacher, but I've been teaching in the Seattle area since 2011, and I've taught middle school through collegiate level ensembles, choral music, music theater, and some drama and piano performance as well. I sing right now, not as much professionally, but in the past I've sung professionally in the Seattle area. And I have a music degree from Barnard, and I have graduate degrees from the University of Washington and Western Washington University. And that's it.
I'll go next. My name is Lauren Ishida. I am the class of 2008, where I majored in music and psychology. I love singing, and I did that for a while. Currently, I'm working as a director of promotion for SHOT, European American Music, which is a music publisher. We are based in Mainz, Germany, and we have a New York office. And so I oversee all the promotion and marketing for the New York office. We have an international team. I also work as the administrative director for the Clarion Music Society, which is an early music ensemble based in New York City. We perform on period instruments. Well, I don't perform, but I support those who perform on period instruments. And we have a choir, and we do a lot of great work. There's a lot of grant writing and sort of outreach that goes along with that. We have an education program. And yeah, it all started at Barnard. It was really a great place to learn music. Kira and I were classmates many a time. And you know, from there, it was great to kind of explore what the world of music was, from performance and music history to suddenly going into the business world. And it was a really cool transition. So happy to be here with all of you today.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Shara Morris, and I am from the Barnard class of 2011. And I fulfill more of the audio side of things. So I work in podcasting, and I'm currently an executive producer and head up development for Sony Music Podcasts. So as part of Sony's broader initiative, of course, we know Sony as, you know, the big music juggernaut that they are, but they have gotten more into podcasts over the last several years. So I've always had an interest in working in audio. From my Barnard days was, you know, interning for WNYC and Houston Public Radio. I'm from Houston originally. I live in LA now, and was, as the podcast wave happened, I kind of rode that wave and got way into the podcast world, and here I am. So I oversee a lot of productions from beginning to end, executive producing and developing shows, whether they're Sony original podcasts that we make. We also have a work for hire business where instead of the shows that we market and distribute ourselves, people come to us and ask us to make shows for them. So we also work on shows for CBS. We worked on shows for Dateline. We've worked on shows for the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle. And basically we focus on making premium. They can be chat-driven shows, but our specialty is narrative documentary podcasts. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys, and thanks for this opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. You guys are all doing such interesting work and have such diverse backgrounds, which is fantastic. So thinking on your career trajectory thus far, I'm curious to know what opportunities you found to be most valuable for you in getting involved in your current field. And this is a two-part question. Thinking on the importance of community and building community sort of in the respective work that you do, how did you go about sort of building your network? And anyone can jump in again.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say for me, because I started out in like music history was kind of the area that I really enjoyed. When I was at Barnard, I loved my music history classes, and I thought maybe that would be an area to pursue. I was also performing a lot, and so I got to meet a lot of people who were also musicians, also performing, also people who were graduate students at different schools, and kind of got to meet them and see what they were doing. And the interesting thing is that at the time, I only sort of knew music as like, you get a PhD and you teach at university, or maybe you go into music ed and you teach at various levels, whether it's elementary, middle school, high school, or you do community groups, or you are performing full time. I didn't know much about the world in between that, sort of the business world. I kind of thought that was like for, music business was like for business people who like the arts. I didn't really know that world very well. And so for me, it was actually meeting a lot of performers, a lot of people who came from the same background, who were also looking for ways to pursue music, but in a way that wasn't as a full-time performer or as an instructor or as someone who's teaching like at the graduate level or the university level. So I started with a lot of internships. That was kind of the thing, and working, volunteering a bit. I really love early music, and so I started working actually with Clarion in 2010 when I was doing my master's degree. I started working a little bit for them, helping out with grant writing, learning what that world was about. I learned that I liked promotion a bit more, although I still do write grants for them. But working in the marketing and promotion world and building up those skills happened just on the job. You're working with the company. I went to Hunter for my master's, and we had a small opera company, and I loved it because it was all hands on deck. We had a tiny, tiny budget, and so everybody kind of had to jump in and do everything. The singers were also, helping set out the backstage stuff, and we'd clean up and put tarps down and all sorts of things, pick up props, go to costumes, print programs. That's where I learned how to write press releases because I had never done it before. I knew how to write really good essays. Barnard's really big on writing, as you all know, but press releases were a big thing. And so from there, I started doing more of that kind of work, figuring out how to send things out to newspapers, working with the press, working with like WNYC to send out, radio ads and all that sort of thing. So it was one of those things where I got experience right on the job, and that was great. And so by doing that, of course, with like-minded people who love music, you start to build that network, and you kind of see a lot of the same faces over and over in different positions. And I'm in classical music publishing now, so in 2017, I interviewed for Shot, which is they published Carmina Burana, which is the many other works as well, but one of the big famous works. And they were looking for a promotion director. And by that time, I'd never worked in publishing. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I own their scores, but I didn't know about publishing. But what I did know is that I knew how to write press releases. I really liked people. I loved new music, and everything that I had done up to that point was like a great way to get into that career. And the network that came behind me, the folks I'd worked with in this small opera company, were great references for the next step. So I think that's a long way of saying in this field, there's a lot of twists and turns you can possibly take. You know, there's a lot of different areas in the what we call music business. And so I think it's a lot of when you're talking about Jihyun, about building your network, you never know quite who you're going to meet. A lot of folks start out as music history, music theory, music performance students. You know, we get our degrees, our bachelor's degrees, and then it's an interesting way to figure out, like, okay, what do we do with them next? Where do we go? What are our other skills that we do really well? And that's where things like internships are really handy, because then you get, like, you start grant writing and you realize, oh, I don't like grant writing, or maybe you love it. Or, you know, you start doing marketing and you're like, oh, that's really stressful, or maybe that's like where you thrive. And so that's what you kind of need to do a little bit of in the music field to kind of figure out where you can, you know, leave your mark. I'll be quiet.
I guess I'll speak on the podcast front. So for me, I think it's a couple things. And Lauren, you were touching on some of these themes too, of like one mantra that we have in our family is like, you never know who you don't know. So you just never know like who you might meet and how they could change your trajectory. So in general, I would say to just like always be open, because yeah, you never know how this person can impact your life. For me, I definitely did internships. So that in Barnard, I felt like it was very much encouraged and part of the culture. And so, like I said before, after my freshman year, I interned at Houston Public Radio. And that was super helpful. And I actually am still not actively, but I still talk and am in touch with one of the producers who mentored me there. And also the summer after my junior year, I interned at WNYC. And that was really helpful. And one thing I'll say is that in my Barnard, when I was at Barnard, I always toggled between the world of hard news and entertainment, because podcasting didn't even like, and storytelling didn't really even exist as much as a career. Like Radio Lab and This American Life were some of the only shows that were out, and it just felt like so pie in the sky. And so I was always toggling between those worlds, and I loved those internships, but I wasn't sure that I felt completely comfortable in a newsroom either. And so right out of college, it was like still kind of coming out of the recession, and I got a job with VH1, which was very much on the entertainment side of things. And it was a good first job, but I kind of wanted to swing back into the other direction. And what I realized from those internships is that I got some really nice hands-on experience of like making shows, sorry, not making shows, but editing and, being mentored. But I really wanted to kind of get in the tape and just make my own stuff. And I was really struggling with that, where I was like, I know I'm creative, but how do I actually make my own thing? And so at the time, and it still exists, but not in the same iteration, there's a school called the Salt Institute for Documentary Studies. And so I ended up applying and getting into that. And it's a cohort of students who are living in Portland, Maine for about 4 months. And it's just a crash course in making audio. And that experience was so formative for me, where it gave me the tools that I needed to make my own stories, and also kind of encouraged me and gave me the confidence to be creative. Now, in terms of building a network, that cohort became a huge network for me. My teacher from that program helped introduce me to my current boss, who I've been working with for 5 years now. So I would say absolutely keep in touch with those people who are part of your kind of like class, whether it's your grad school class or, this another program type of class, or your Barnard class, because those are the people that you're coming up with, and you guys can help each other along the way. And when you're first starting out, you can commiserate and say, oh my gosh, how am I going to get that first leg up in, my job? But then when you're getting older, you can help each other with raises and promotions and things like that. And I still have those people that I talk to. So the other thing I'll say is that I post-SALT, I ended up moving to Los Angeles, and I started, I got a job there, but I started freelancing in audio on the side. And what really became an interesting experience for me was that I had a friend here who had a radio show, like a slot at a pirate radio station in Chinatown, LA. And she was like, I can't do this anymore. Do you want this slot? And I had just finished this program like learning how to make audio. So I was like, hell yes. So then I had one friend, like two friends in LA, the one who gave me this time slot, and then the other one was a Barnard grad who was 3 years older than me, who was a mentor, and we kind of grew up together. And I was like, will you be my host, like my co-host, and we'll make this show together? And we ended up making a podcast back in 2013, like before Serial came out. And we were just like having fun and experimenting. And so that was so huge in that we were developing our voices. And also, it was leaning on this friendship and this Barnard friendship also. And we were playing. And I think having that sense of play is also really important in the creative process too. So we did become way more confident in our voices, and we started saying, hey, what we're making is actually good and we can actually freelance this stuff. So we started pitching it to KCRW, which is the public radio station out in LA, and KPCC, which is one of the other stations. And we were getting picked up and like going on, NPR affiliated stations across the country, which was really fun. And then it gave me the confidence to be like, okay, I think I can do this. And so it was like, she gave me that confidence and part of that network. And then my SALT community, I also started like joining, when I moved to LA, a Facebook group called Listen Up LA. And I just kind of started putting myself out there. So I would say like, have chutzpah, but also do the work. And I'll say one more thing. There was one person who I reached out to who was a producer at the time of a successful podcast called Call Your Girlfriend, who lived in LA, and I admired her work. And she apparently we're friendly now and I've known her for years. She would get emails all the time. Can I pick your brain? Can I take you out for coffee? And I think she was kind of like, she didn't love that feeling where a lot of people just want to take time out of her day, but they weren't showing that they were knowledgeable. And that's what I mean about doing the work too. And I was very flattered that she's told this to me years later, but she was like, you did that to me, but I could tell that you were very serious and had listened to my show and took interest in me. And a lot of people don't really do that. So I would say that too. And those connections really have been so formative and for me over the years. Okay. I'm thinking about how both of you have connected this so dramatically to Barnard, and I love that so much. And I feel like I'm about to tell you that I left New York the year after I graduated, and it seems wild to think about it now that I decided to just move across the country. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a job. And I was like, I know I want to go to graduate school at the University of Washington because I want to be in this program and I want to study with these people. But I look back on it now and I'm like, I don't know where I had that bravery, where that came from. But I think being at Barnard and being someone who felt really self-possessed and like I could kind of do anything allowed me to leave a city that I really loved and an apartment and friends and roommates that I felt really comfortable with and just sort of go out into the world and do a thing. But the connection there was that when an internship, after my sophomore year, I began interning at the Metropolitan Opera Guild, which is now defunct and has been wrapped into the Met Opera proper. But I was working in the education department, and the most wonderful times that I had there were when we were bringing in classes from New York City schools to see operas, to see dress rehearsals. And I had the great fortune of being able to help facilitate those workshops with the students and work on professional development. I was doing some grant writing as well. Work on professional development with teaching artists who were out in the public schools and then bringing their classes in to see the opera. And I just realized that my favorite time was when I was with students and being a teacher. I had grown up being a singer in choirs my whole life, but that was a very limited context in terms of understanding what public education in choral music really looks like. So this sort of gave me a little taste for that, and I thought, I'd love to explore music education, not necessarily be an elementary teacher. That has never been for me. But the idea of choral music in the larger scope was something that I thought would be really exciting. So when I moved to Seattle, I spent a year just sort of doing a job so I could get in-state tuition, and then really found my footing with music education at the University of Washington, and started to develop roots here, not only with my peers in graduate school, but also by spending time out in the schools observing teachers and learning about what the programs could look like, and really kind of figuring out for myself where I wanted to exist within the scope. Because, not only are there issues with, funding and access and equity, you end up seeing a lot of different choir programs, and you come to terms with yourself thinking, what do I want my program to look like? How am I serving students through music? Am I teaching music, or am I teaching kids through music? And does my program need to be this really rigorous performing program that's going to festivals and competitions, or can it just be a place where I'm developing community with these students and allowing them a place to develop their self-identities and explore the world through music? So I had such a wonderful experience at the University of Washington, just sort of getting my feet wet and seeing all of the diversity within the Seattle area public schools. And then, I got my teaching certificate and became a teacher. And that was a very isolating experience, because suddenly I went from having a cohort of educators who were with me every day to being the sole choral educator in a building. It's a really strange thing when you don't have a learning community there with you. It's not like the chemistry program where there's 4 teachers, or English where there's 12 teachers. It's me by myself making all these decisions. And so it was vital for me to find an opportunity to connect with other choir teachers. And there are, in every state in the US, music education associations that are statewide. There are also national organizations and regional organizations. So I've made it a priority for me to be connected with my colleagues who are also teaching high school or middle school or collegiate choral music, to connect with those people through professional development sessions. I sit on the board for one of our Kodai Education Association in Seattle, and I teach on faculty in the summer, so I'm teaching teachers in the summer. Beyond that, though, because music is such an intersectional field, I have found over time, now that I sort of have my feet under me, I've been teaching for 14 years at this point, that I am relying less on my choral colleagues and spending more time trying to figure out how I can build communities of people who are ethnomusicologists or linguists, or people who are doing work that intersects with whatever music I might be teaching with any given concert cycle. So for example, right now we're doing, at the high school where I teach, we're doing some Brazilian music. And so I've reached out to people who speak Portuguese. I've reached out to Brazilian cultural associations in the area. I've reached out to families within the school community who have ties to Brazil or South America. And those are some of my favorite opportunities in my job to be creative, because no one piece of music is the same. And so my opportunity to create a community within each concert cycle changes. Now that's a ton of work, and I have to sort of temper that work and recognize I can't go super deep with every single piece if we've got 16 pieces of rep that we're singing per concert, for example. But slowly over time, my networks are continuing to evolve, and my connections are really continuing to increase with people, not only locally, but also, I will say, teaching on Zoom during COVID kind of gave me an opportunity to just dream big and say, you know what, I'm going to contact Tracy Wong, who is this Malaysian woman who's teaching in Toronto, and see if she would come on for an hour and talk to my students about Malaysian folk music. Why not? And I just sort of allowed myself to dream big, and I had, thankfully, the access to provide compensation for those people during that time. but I've continued to rely on a network outside of my hyper local area because Zoom allows us to connect so beautifully, and other ways as well. It's not just Zoom. I still sort of shudder every time I get on Zoom because, those were teaching on Zoom was not my favorite. But I think that I'm seeing just how there are ways in which I'm really hyper specific with how I'm building community and connecting with people. But then over time, those things are continuing to evolve and enlarge as I go. And there's no predictability necessarily as to who I'm going to connect with. Maybe it's a student whose family is a mariachi ensemble, or maybe it's someone whose mother immigrated from Korea and has a specific story to tell about the Dorachi song that we are singing. So it's endlessly creative and fun for me to be creating those connections with people who are not necessarily choral educators, but are directly connected to the music that we are studying.
Thank you all so much for that. I'm hearing some really great tips about networking that we often talk about at Beyond Barnard too, especially in the context of advising, like, being really open to connecting with a wide range of people. Kira, what you mentioned about networking sort of constantly evolving really, really resonates. And also, and all of you guys have touched on this, but preparing and doing your research before an informational interview or conversation. Thank you all for touching on these themes. Because all of you guys are in such different line of work, I'm curious to know, what does your day-to-day work look like?
So mine varies, I guess, as all of ours would, but I do a lot of writing. I would say a good portion of my life is spent writing. I do a lot of newsletters and I create lots of press kits. Part of my job is to make sure that the works in our catalog are performed by the major orchestras and opera houses and ensembles. And so there's a lot of liaisoning back and forth between performers and organizations and our composers, because we represent a lot of living composers, to make sure that they know what works we have in our catalog and then where they can get the music, and kind of giving them some input on maybe programming based on what they programmed before. So a lot of just connecting with people to try to give them a sense of what in our catalog might work for them, introducing them to new composers. And sharing the work of the composers with the world. Sometimes I travel to a lot of premieres, mostly domestically because we're an international company. So like if something's going on in Asia, like our Japan colleagues will take it, and on the continent, our German colleagues, in London, our London colleagues, but usually domestically, sometimes internationally, we'll travel around to support our composers and the work that they do. And yeah, it's just, again, it's still a lot of connection over, over many years and many exposures with the same sorts of people and new people that you meet. And I just want to say, I love what you said, Shara, about having chutzpah and doing your work. That doesn't just apply to like the first job experience. And Kira, you said very much the same thing when you kind of picked up and moved on. There's it's like I say, like, fake it till you make it, but there's a sort of like in this kind of field, because no matter whether you're in education or in audio and podcasting, or you're in marketing and promotion, or any sorts of these fields, the direction can just twist and turn. You never quite know exactly where you're going to end up. You don't exactly know who you're going to meet. And so I would say listen to everything, read everything you can get your hands on, just take in as much content as you can. And if you see what you're doing starting to go in one direction, like Kira, you're working with all these international songs, and then that's taking you down into the world of the people whose cultures those songs come from. And if you're working with podcasting, dealing with other podcasters, if you're working in marketing and promotion, dealing with people who are in that field as well, getting ideas from them, and then figuring out, what's out there. Like I need to know, for example, when I'm sharing the music of my composers, I need to know what's being programmed. So before I have a meeting with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, I've got to know what they're programming. I better not go in there sort of being like, hey, so consider this composer. Like, yeah, we programmed him last year. I need to know what's going on. So that means just taking in a lot of content. I think in this field in particular, there's just so much out there. You kind of have to know what the pulse is. So read the trade magazines, get online, join groups for people, people in your field, go to networking, go to concerts, whatever area of music you're in, really explore that to the fullest. I would say just, yeah, have chutzpah and do the work. That's a great one. I'm going to keep that.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just kind of looking at my
calendar this week and what I have going on, because it can vary so much. Because there are multiple sides to what I do. That, with the executive producing, that means I'm doing high level editorial producing work and making sure that our show that we are working on has, everything is getting done. We're kind of steering the ship. So for me, I'm, you know, like this week, for example, I had an outlining meeting with our lead producer on a show that we're working on for 48 hours. So I was working with the lead producer and the editor on the project to see how do we want to outline the series before our producer starts scripting. So that's kind of like a fun ideation period. But then like I could also on any given day, once that producer is mired in production, he will be sending me scripts and I will be reviewing those scripts and giving notes. So actually, Lauren, to your point too, writing is huge, because I mean, I started out writing scripts myself and now I'm giving those edits. It could also be one other thing I'm working on today is a big brand has come to us to say, we want to get into the podcast space. Can you send along a proposal of how you would carry out our show? So I am assembling a deck and putting some creative together, basically selling our services. So part of my job is also a selling piece of it too. So I'm working on that right now and just assembling all the pieces, like how much are we going to charge for this, and working with our production management side of things. But yeah, and also our marketing team. So that's another thing that I will do in a day. I'm also having a call today with a reporter who I've been talking to for months about a story that we're trying to develop together. And I want to pitch that story to Sony as a potential original series. And if they actually don't accept it, because we have our own internal pitch process, it's something that we might pitch to other distributors like an iHeart or an Apple or an Audible, and so forth. So that development work is a huge part of my day-to-day. I also, once going back to the executive producing, I listen to a lot of mixes too. So once we get further into production, I will be listening to mixes, giving notes. This is working, this isn't working, cut this, is this, we're creating a sonic universe. So doing that as well. Yeah, I would say those are kind of the big things. I also help with staffing. I'm working on a show right now and we work with a lot of freelance producers. So I have to interview producers and see, do they have the skills, like for one show that I'm currently staffing, to manage an extremely high profile journalist host. Can they manage them, but also can they turn out really good scripts and know how to tell a good story? So that's something else that I do. So I think one thing I love about my job is that it not only does the day-to-day change so much, and there's so many different types of things that I'm doing, but even within the shows that I'm creating, they're so different. Like I could be working on, a true crime show, but then I could also be working, we did the companion podcast for And Just Like That, the Sex and the City show, or like an anime show, or we worked on an investigative series with the Wall Street Journal and doing that. So for me, I'm definitely a generalist, and I was a history major at Barnard because I was also like, I don't exactly know where I want to focus on, and I just want to write and think critically. And this gives me the opportunity to do that too, where I can just dabble in so many different worlds. I'd say my workday is much more regular than both of the people you've just heard from because I am anchored by a school schedule. So I spend my day in the classroom in front of students rehearsing music. And that takes a tremendous amount of preparation outside of the classroom. And I feel like I wear many, many hats, from planning for field trips to planning for tours to making sure that we have fundraised enough to have an accompanist, or, all those things that happen behind the scenes so that a performing arts program can happen. And the reality is that in public education, those things aren't happening with a parent booster organization or with an administration. It's happening with me. So I'm doing all the things in that capacity, but the majority of my time is spent making music with students, which is the best job in the world, in my opinion. It's also a danger for me because it is the thing I'm most passionate about. And I find by the end of the day, I start with 0 period jazz choir at 7 a.m. I'm done at 2:30. And then I direct in the evenings, 6 to 8, twice a week. And then we have concerts and we have field trips and we have events and we have tours. So there's things going on the weekends, and it's very much not a 9 to 5. Many teachers are more strict about that. I think depending on what you teach, as an educator, you have the opportunity to be more set in your hours. You can get your prep work done in your prep period, and you can go home and be a human at 3 o'clock. As a music teacher, that's not always a luxury that we have. And I often find that when I think about who I want to be, like as a human, as a balanced individual out in the world, as a mom, I have 2 children, I'm married, I have friends and family. It is often difficult for me to balance. And so I have to make sometimes some hard decisions about how I prioritize my time, because the reality is I'm doing all of the preparation outside of the school day so that I can be present with my students during the school day. And so I think in all the places where I've worked, middle school, high school, university level, the day-to-day is pretty structured throughout the school year. We are often working towards a performance, but it's not the only goal, right? We're looking to emerge worldviews through music, not just so that we can perform notes and rhythms spectacularly on stage. We want that too. So there's a very sort of linear element to the work that I'm doing, but then there's also sort of like the long-term world exploration that we want to do. I think a lot of people also choose to not do things outside of the school day, but I find that it's really invigorating for me to be continuing to work with people in multiple communities. And so I do choose to do that, but it's very much a balance with my spouse. He's also a high school music teacher. So yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. Learn from me. It's, December's not a fun time for us. March is not a fun time for us for festival season, because we're just trading off as best we can. And it's a lot. And sometimes I finish with those performance periods and I think this is not sustainable. But then the next day I'm so excited to start into the next thing and, do it again. So it's a little addictive. It's maybe a little unbalanced, but if you love being a musician and being a music teacher, there's nowhere else you want to be. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just have to jump in because I've seen your Facebook page. I've seen some of what you do, and I'm sure it's just a tiny portion of what you do with your students. But like, oh my gosh, if I grew up with that, I mean, I think I'd love music even more than I already do, and I can't imagine that any kid that has a teacher like that wouldn't love music. I mean, you pour so much passion into it, and teaching is such a challenging job. I mean, writing things, those are all difficult in their own way, but, dealing with young people and inspiring them, and then doing, like you said, a lot of the work in public education to raise that money and to make sure, yeah, you've got the accompanist, you book the space, you've got the people there, the programs are corrected and printed, and I mean, so many things go into that. So just my hats off to you, because as a fellow mother of 2, who is trying to inspire them to love music as well. It's it's a lot of effort. So bravo to you. My hats
Thank
off.
you. And likewise to you both. I mean, I think the work that we do, if we are passionate about it, then we spend the time in it, right?
Yeah.
And I was not, as a younger person, and I have to say also at Barnard, I don't think I practiced a lot of like work-life balance. So I hope for all of you who are here that maybe you are better conditioned than I was to like take breaks.
I will say as you get older and as you know, if you choose to have a family and however you choose to structure your life and the things that are of value to you as you move from student into your young professional life. I mean, there's certainly periods where you feel like you have to hustle a lot, you know, you're building up your skills, your network and things like that. But I always found that too, when I looked at fields to go into and how I would apply the skills that I had learned from my first jobs and those in the network that I had created, is also about, like you said, finding that work-life balance. You know, when you have children, what kind of career does that look like fundamentally? I'm married to a performer who's also a professor. So he is teaching music and he's also making music all the time. So that means he needs time to practice. That means those concert periods are very difficult. Having two performers in the house would be quite challenging as well. I get that. And so it's like kind of, you know, sometimes you have to take the practical into account too. Now, fortunately, I love this particular field, but there are things to think about. It's like, how do you want to structure your life when you're 30 and when you're 35 and 40 and so on? And what's that balance? And it can change over time. Like the type of work you can take changes over time. The skills are transferable and the network, the broader you can make it, the younger you are, I think the more opportunities you have to kind of move around and say, okay, well, you know, right now I have young people at home. I can't take the, you know, the press relations job that I might take maybe 10 years on, you know, because I would be on call all the time. Or maybe, you know, teaching is the right job for me, but maybe it's not because I have all these, you know, late evening types of things and I can't just sort of phone it in. So it's, yeah, you kind of have to think about what your needs are too outside of the field. I think that's true for most fields. I haven't really existed out of this field, but I would imagine just as you know, things to think about as you move from Barnard to beyond.
Yeah.
I think I have just, oh, go ahead.
No. You finish.
I
This
think
is actually really interesting because I had a kid 9.5 months ago. So I'm like,
That's exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Mine are first and third grade, so they're at least like in school during the day now and we have that flow. I think, yeah, Lauren, to your point, like I have just gotten comfortable with saying no to opportunities. One other thing I really enjoy doing is being an adjudicator at festivals, and I conduct it, you know, honor groups and things kind of around the state and around the nation, which has been so exciting. But it's just that additional thing of, you know, time away and weekends away and additional repertoire that I have to prepare. And, you know, you come in and you do sort of like a 3-day, you know, rehearsal extravaganza, and then you perform and then you're done and you don't see those students again. And I love those types of things. And also I've started to feel comfortable saying no, because it is a question of, you know, where do I want to draw that line? Is it okay for me to not have this line item on my resume at this point? Yes, you get to that point. But yeah, I think there's definitely a couple decades in there where I've really hustled.
Your career is long, right? And the opportunities will come and, you know, you have to kind of pick and choose what works best for that time. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say about that is that like I think all of those things are true. And, you know, yeah, however you decide to structure or go about your life, have a workplace that is, you know, amenable to you too. Like if you, I don't want to discourage the ambition. And I also think to do all the things that you want to do to, you know, it can be hard and it's something that I think I'm thinking about a lot, but you know, to be that voice to make the workplace like bend to you too. You know, I think especially that's something I think about being like more in a leadership position in my work. You know, how do I make the workplace better for me and also for the people coming up who are younger and newer? Anyway, I think that's it. But it's just that, you know, hopefully if you want to do something, you can do it, but have people around you to also support you to make that happen within your network and work world.
Right. And you make a great point when you are the leader, then, you know, when you have someone under you, you're dealing with interns and you have things, you know, be the kind of leader that you would want to have, that you are like, okay, yeah, I understand, like health comes first, other things can come first and we can work things out. So yeah, I think the workspace environment is really important. No matter where you are in your career, you should, you know, you should be in a space that values your talents and where you can grow. And that is you know, a nurturing place, and ambition is great. And I mean, they're definitely, like I said, there are times to really hustle and put that in, but and get the, you know, the lines on the resume and the work experience, but also to remember that to take, you know, like I said, your career is long, take good care of your health, even young, and learn how to set the boundaries. I didn't always do that. I would take on lots of things because I would say, well, I can't say no, I can't say no, I can't say no. And it would be a lot, you know, and learn where you can start to set boundaries, or you could say, you know, feel free to say like, I can't get that to you by Friday, but I can get it to you by next Tuesday. Believe it or not, that took a really long time for me to say. And I think just learning, you know, how to kind of structure that for yourself early on and to work with people, you get a lot of respect for that as well. And you protect your own health and your career going forward, because you want to be in this for a long time. You don't want to get burned out young. It is a great world to be in. So
Definitely, definitely. I'm gonna jump in here. This is the first time that so much wonderful sort of advice has come out of the "can you tell us about your day-to-day work" question. So I appreciate this so much because it actually covered the next question I wanted to ask you all, which is like, what advice would you give to students who are interested in pursuing a career in this field? And I feel like you guys not only talked about sort of the important components of networking and et cetera, but also the conversation about like balance, which is so important. I want to open up the floor. I want to be mindful of time here and open up the floor to our students in the room. For those who have questions, you can feel free to unmute yourselves. You can also drop questions into the chat as well.
I have a question. Thank you, Lauren, Kyra, and Shara for your like sharing just now. It was really interesting. And I'm not sure if it's been answered yet because I joined late. My name is Yuki and I'm a junior. When I joined, you guys were like talking a lot about community building, you know, really connecting with people. And recently I joined the e-board of like a gaming club. And so the people I have to rally are like gamers. And sometimes it can be a little difficult because I literally have to get them to like come out and touch grass. Um, and um, so I think the tips on how you connected with people and how you find support, I thought that was really helpful. Um, but I guess like apart from like all of these like partnerships and all that, because I'm also handling external partnerships, so I have to do a lot of outreach and collaboration as well. How do you get people like really like excited about the ideas that you come up with? Because I think a lot of effort can go into a collaboration. Like I've had a lot of experience like working on projects and all that, but sometimes it feels like you're not always getting sufficient attention or like the support that your effort deserves. Like even though you have like done your best to like match it to like what you think your audience would want. Yeah, like how do you scale it up in that sense as well?
I don't know much about the gaming world, to be honest with you. I know, Shara, you were talking about podcasting when you built your podcast, and you had a Barnard fellow alumna that you worked with to build that podcast as co-hosts. And so you had someone from like the real world, like the grass world, you know, off the screen, to kind of work with you to build something, even if it is digital, even if it is online, because I know that there are various spaces, you know, and a lot of times, like if you're podcasting or you're working in a gaming space, or even if you're composing for all sorts of, you know, sync and, you know, television and you know, other sorts of media, it can be the kind of thing where you're virtual a lot. I mean, a lot of my colleagues are abroad, so we only meet virtually most of the time, unless they're in New York or I'm in London or something. So I think, you know, building up your network both in person, you know, there's a lot of overlap, like we were saying, in terms of who you get to meet. Your network, there will be overlaps with the people that your meetings network, and then where that is in the middle, you'll have a lot of mutual friends in between. So I think as you're, you know, where you are right now, if you're working on specific skills like design and, you know, gaming design and all sorts of projects like that, I would build up those skills reach out to people that you know in that profession, like in that area, people that you want to be like, your fellow colleagues who are also doing the same kind of work. If you're in this group, figure out what people are doing. And maybe sometimes you just have to be the one to say like, hey guys, like if you're local, let's go meet up at this, you know, at this coffee bar, and like let's you know, let's work together in real life, you know. And then that's a good way to strategize. Sometimes just meeting in person is a really great thing if you can, or just having one-to-ones on Zoom and things like that. It's, you know, it's important to get the people, you know, if you have a project that you're really passionate about, then you need the space to talk about it. You need the space to like be able to sell what you're doing. So how, you know, that takes time, I know. But yeah, does that kind of answer your question? I'm sorry, I don't know that space particularly well, but I think that in general, just the more you can learn about your space. Like if you're in podcasting and you have a specific area of podcasting, I would learn about like who's your competition, like who, you know, who do you want to be like, or who's, you know, if you're you know, a choral director, what are the other choirs doing? You know, what kind of repertoire are they working on? Where does my group fit into this mix? You know, and if you're in promotions of any kind, well, what are your peers doing? And I think that's really important to know, just being as curious as possible about the world out there, on or off the screen, as it may be.
I agree, Lauren. And I think also the more you can get to know the people who you are trying to engage with, the better. The more agency that you give to those stakeholders to make decisions about what it is you're going to be doing in those groups. I mean, I hate to break it, like we all hate group projects, right? Because we're always the people who are doing the work in the group projects, right? Group projects are like the thing when you get into the real world, depending on the work that you're doing. You've got to be collaborating and you've got to be making sure that you are listening. The best leaders I've ever had have been the best listeners. So if you can create a space where people want to be by involving them in that decision-making process, they're going to want to be there because they have a stake in that at that point.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think because you were also talking about getting stakeholders kind of on board and getting them excited about what you're doing, right? So I think, first of all, if you're excited about something, that is infectious. So like if you don't care about it or if you're unsure about it, people feel that and they won't be bought in. So you have to be fully bought in before you can convince others to be bought in to whatever you want them to be on board with. And yeah, Kyra, to what you were saying, you know, I would find those points of connection too. So when you're learning about these people that you want them to get on board, what do they find interesting? What will they, you know, latch on to? So it's also, again, doing that work to be like, oh, I know that this person loves League of Legends. We have a League of Legends meetup and I need to tell them about it specifically. So you're also catering your ask to specific people. So it's not, it feels like not just this blanket thing, because then it's easy for someone to opt out. But if it's, I'm talking to you specifically and you're going to find this interesting because X, 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 then they'll be like, oh, they want me specifically. And I do find this innately interesting and they're selling me on it.
Thank you all for that. And I'm looking at the time right now, and we only have a couple minutes left. And I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. So for our students in the room, you know, we didn't have as much time for the Q&A as usual. I'm dropping my email into the chat. You can feel free to email me these questions directly, and then I will connect with our panelists to get you those responses. And so feel free to send me an email there. And I do want to start closing out our panel here. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today and providing such thoughtful insight. So for our panelists, you'll be hearing from me. I'll put everyone in one email so that contact information can be exchanged. And for our students, we hope to see you at our next Career Insights event. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.